Okay, so we can get started. I'm sure some other folks will be joining us, but we have a good group with us and we're ready to go. So thank you for joining this second part of our boot camp series. For those of you who were able to join us last week for the first part of the series, thank you. And if you're new to the program, welcome to the Riskified group, and we look forward to spending the next 20 to 30 minutes together. Our goal through this boot camp was really to spend 4 sessions, no more than 30 minutes each, kind of covering in depth a few different areas that would be most beneficial as you start to think about preparation for the holiday season. And today's session, as you can see on the slide, is all around the fraud process of automation, and we can get going. So before jumping into the content, a quick background for those of you who are not familiar with Riskified. Our company has been around about 3 years, working with hundreds of merchants worldwide and providing what we like to call an end-to-end solution to e-commerce risk management. Ultimately, we take on the full liability of transactions we see, putting our money where our mouth is and helping merchants grow. Myself, I'm Andy Friedman. I've been with the team about 1.5 years. Located in our Boston office, our company is headquartered in Tel Aviv, Israel. So the process very quickly, and promise not to spend too much time talking about ourselves, just wanted to kind of show you the context of who we are and what we do. We work with retailers to take off the risk of any transaction that they're looking to make a decision upon. So that could be high-risk transactions that you're ready to decline, international volume, or everything. Everything we see, we run through our models, we make instant decisions, ultimately increasing your approval rate and not adding any friction on the customer. At the end, we guarantee the transaction, so if we're wrong and there's fraud in an order we've approved, we guarantee it. So these are some of the merchants we work with. The relevance here is that we have spent time working on a number of core categories that many of you may be working directly or as a partner with. Consumer electronics, digital goods, fashion retailers, sports, travel, ticketing tend to be some of our biggest verticals, and you're seeing some of the customers we work with on a global basis. So jumping into what we covered last week, for those of you who were unable to attend, the first part of our boot camp was all around preparing for the holiday load. We spent a lot of time talking about how to build your team, how do you hire, how do you kind of make sure that you have the right staffing, how do you make sure that everyone's working in harmony, so understanding what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, and how do they escalate quickly, in the end goal of making sure that you're able to review transactions accurately and efficiently, keeping your customers happy and getting things out the door to fulfillment as quickly as possible. So if you missed the session and are interested in attending, please check out our website. The link is here to our resources section where you can download and view the webinar. So today we'd like to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about lightening the load on your fraud team by boosting operations or automation in the process. So specifically, what does that mean? We're going to talk about our approach and theory around automation and approvals, how we don't think it makes a ton of sense to auto-decline transactions. While that may reduce the load, it ultimately costs your business, so we'll talk about how we see that in our perspective. Specifically, we'll get into adjusting your rules and models for the holidays. Always important to note what's different about this season, and ensuring that you're set up to be successful. And lastly, ensuring that you have visibility into some of the data that you may not be including in your risk analysis today that we at Riskified find extremely helpful in making fast and accurate decisions on transactions that are sent to manual review. So a calendar, just to get set the landscape, we're about 3.5 months out from Black Friday. Hard to believe, summer is almost over. And what that means is that you will surely see a huge spike of sales volume and over a very tight period of time. This will add all sorts of things on your operation, namely stress, increased kind of demands, with an expectation to review quickly. One thing that is interesting from a risk perspective is that when we look historically at the holiday season, while we do see the increase in volume significantly, we tend not to see that fraudsters are necessarily more active during this time. It's just the percentage is similar because you're going after a higher base. So there's more kind of volume to deal with, but not necessarily a spike in fraudulent activity. Fraudsters, as you always must remember, treat their job seriously year-round, so there's no reason for them to escalate during this period of time based on the data that we've seen. So getting into some of these challenges, we touched on some of this last week, but outside of the sudden spike of volume, the stakes are higher. It's very likely that your CFO and your business teams are accounting on this period of time to drive business performance at the end of the year. Everyone wants to measure how companies perform over the holiday season. This is really a time where you have a lot on your shoulders to make sure the volume that is coming through, that is converting, ends up being a successful sale. That comes with stress, and so obviously the expectations on your review team are heightened. People are often working 24-hour shifts. People are brought over from other parts of the organization to support. That all comes with a lot more accountability and a lot more stress. Time sensitivity, obviously this is essential. We're dealing with an age where consumers can get what they want in instant fashion. So if you're dealing with a manual review queue that extends over 24 to 48 hours, ultimately that adds friction for the customer who really does need their goods the next day or as soon as possible. And the last thing that always adds challenges is that to handle the load, we often see companies hiring temporary staff, bringing on other people to support. Ultimately, these people just don't have the benefit of years of experience, and so there's always a little bit of inefficiency in the process that must be overcome. So hopefully none of these are new, and hopefully you all have plans in place to kind of counter some of these challenges, but we empathize and work hard to kind of handle that on our end. So how do we do this? Well, one of the first steps is all around automation. So two primary rules here that we want to cover. The first is our belief that I stated up front, which is why we believe it's important never to auto-decline a transaction. Ultimately, there are ways to be efficient while avoiding some of those rules-based systems that will cost you good volume. And the second is let's teach you the rules, how you can actually implement the rules to auto-approve. So starting with auto declines. Now this information, it would be highly advised that you look kind of historically, both over the past few months, as well as last holiday season, to understand what your decline rates are and what kind of decline rules you have in place. Important to figure that these declines will come from two key areas. You kind of have the gateway level or payment processing level declines that could be set in place by things like AVS filters and 3D Secure. These definitely have a negative impact, even in markets like the US and the UK, where AVS is supported. And on the 3D Secure side, there's lots of data out there talking about the conversion issues around 3D Secure. I would make sure if you are looking at this as a solution that you understand how it's being used, even if it's only on a subset of your order population. For example, orders coming from a European country that are over $200, it does have an impact on conversion rate that you'll want to work with your existing payment processing company to understand. On the other side is the merchant level declines. So you know your customers, you know your history far better than anyone. Often merchants will use things like blacklists or rules-based system to help them with reducing the load on the manual review queue. The problem with blacklists is that if they're tied to certain pieces of information like address or IP, often what that leads to is blanket rejections of some very profitable and lucrative legitimate customer bases, including reshippers, universities and colleges, apartment buildings where the same IP will be used, sometimes fraudsters, sometimes not. So we highly advise against blanket rejections and the use of blacklists where possible. And on the rules-based systems, just to reiterate, fraudsters can always beat the rules. And so one of the problems we see is that rules need to be constantly adapted and maintained. And often when you have the information that causes you to update your rules, it's because you've been exposed. We want to make sure that you can think about things in real time, react proactively versus being reactive to the changing patterns of fraudsters on your site. So just some of our kind of thoughts around the problems with auto declines. We do have more data and information if you're interested in seeing what we see on our end. So ultimately, what do declines mean? This is a story that I'm sure is very familiar, but it is important to reiterate. So not only is a false decline costing you the impact of that initial sale, but you also lose the long lifetime value of that customer. We're actually in the process of releasing a white paper with an analyst firm that conducted a survey on customers in the U.S. That had their credit card declined over the last year. These were legitimate customers that have been validated as false positive declines. And their reaction, maybe not surprising, but very impactful, is that over 70% of these customers vow never to return to a retailer who declines their credit card or payment vehicle. That's important. So not only are you losing that first sale, but you're losing a loyal customer. And the last thing that's also important to note is that you really are wasting a lot of the money that's been invested down the channel. So when you turn away a customer who's actually converted, they've checked out, they've kind of purchased the goods from your site after going through the entire consumer journey, the marketing dollars and the investment that you've put into getting that customer at that point is tossed away. And that's something that you can really assist with, supporting your marketing and improving the CPAs that they're putting in place, the cost per acquisition, but being more effective and looking at customers coming through the funnel. So just a little bit of perspective on false positive declines. And just to reiterate one of the points I made, it is easier now than ever for fraudsters to fool your filters. So we do spend quite a bit of time, actually, like on the call with us today are some of our analysts who are scouring the dark web and some of the fraud forums, just to kind of see how fraudsters are behaving and acting. Right now, it's not hard for fraudsters to fool your ABS filters or your CVN checks, because ultimately credit card details are sold in full. It's something that fraudsters call the fulls. And so along with the card details, the CVN and CVV, fraudsters can now get the home address, the birth date, any other information that would be helpful in getting them to dupe your systems and place the order. So here's an example of what some of that could look like. And these honestly can be bought for pennies for their order. So be very careful about the use of filters because they are easy to deceive. So what is our approach? So we've talked about some of the problems with auto declines, and now let's talk about our approach to automation. So we try to focus on automating whatever we can, ultimately because we also see our volume spike. We need to make sure that we're turning away or approving and getting out of the manual review queue everything we can. And how we do that is we never rely on a single data point to make a decision. The way we think about fraud and defining if a transaction is legitimate or not is telling the story of the order, trying to understand based on all the different data points, is the story of a legitimate customer more valid than the story of a fraudster, based on all we know, from the order details, from what they purchased, from the card, from the IP, from the way they behaved on the site. There's a number of factors that come in, and we really do fight against relying on a single data point to make decisions. What is also important to note here is that you have very smart people on your team who know these orders well. Or if you are one of the fraud analysts, you're looking at these transactions on a daily basis. We rely heavily on our analyst team to kind of discover the insights, to identify items or orders that could be approved automatically. And we'll talk about some examples of what that looks like. So how do you do that? Well, one example we like to highlight is about creating rules that will allow you to take a specific dynamic of a transaction and automate an approval. So one thing that we saw historically when we were getting going is that when orders were coming in, where there was a match between the email domain and the IP range that the order was being placed from, that tended to correlate to a very legitimate customer. Low chargeback incidents, very low risk, but a lot of these orders were getting stuck in manual review. So here's an example from a kind of an email domain of usbank.com that we know, based on pulling the IP, it was also placed by the IP range, kind of owned by the company. So what we want to do is, before we just make a decision like that, baking those automations into our process and our models, we want to do some statistical validation. So in this case, we tested it in a number that we find to be statistically meaningful and significant, and we found that 99.8% accuracy on the orders we tested tended to be legitimate. This obviously takes some time, but can be validated pretty quickly if you look at historical data. So we always would advise at looking back at the information you have to plan how you move forward. But what that ultimately resulted in is that now orders that come in where there's a match on the email and IP range are not reviewed by our manual review team. There are other options if that's not something that you're able to pull off. These orders can be batch queried. You can kind of create cheat sheets. So if they do get to manual review, this is a very quick way and quick diagnosis that an analyst can do on the fly. So it kind of gives you that quicker review side. So it's not 100% automated, but close enough. These are things that can do if your system cannot support, that we've seen merchants be pretty successful with. So that's one example. In the interest of time, we want to move on to thinking about the holidays. But if there's follow-ups or you'd like to get a little bit more in depth, we can happily make some of our analyst team available to talk to you about some of the specific challenges you're facing. So step 2 is thinking about the holidays specifically. Let's think about what's different about the holiday period. Ultimately, you're far more likely to see that next day shipping is the norm. Customers want their order. They want it right now. In normal kind of business operations, next day shipping may or may not be considered a fraud indicator. It tends to come at a higher cost, and when users are buying a high ticket item and shipping next day, that can be an indication of risk. In the holidays, that's not so much the truth. The same is true with high order values. So you may have rules in place where in normal season, anything that comes in that's over $500 as a transaction, if your average ticket is normally $250, is flagged and routed to review. Well, in the holidays, that may not be true. Your customers may be saving. This is the big transaction they want to get to their significant other or family member. So you have to take these things into consideration. And there's some other things that we suggest you look at that complement some of these information that may initially or in normal season be a reason to decline. The last thing is the ship bill distance. Oftentimes over the holidays, there are exceptions where you're normally shipping to yourself or your close immediate family or relatives. This is always the season where you're going to ship to your aunt or grandmother who may live far away, or in an international market. So looking at things where there's a large delta between the shipping address and the billing address, in normal season, maybe kind of something that's automatically flagged. Here, this is different. You have to take into consideration this seasonality and the impact. The same is true on the types of things and the places that they're being placed from. So the promoted items, we're all running sales over the holiday season, and it's really important that you are in sync and have full visibility into the marketing team's calendar. What are the daily deals? What are the promotions? What are they doing to kind of drive traffic? And where is that traffic being directed? So if the UK is a new market for a US-based company, that's really important for you to know. Because if you're trying to drive brand awareness in the market, you're going to see a lot more traction. You need to be informed of when that's happening and how that traffic's coming in. Ultimately, international orders. At Riskified, one of the things that we see is that when a transaction is placed cross-border, so outside the domestic market, there are impacts on fraud rates, of course, but what's more important to note is that the value of those items tend to be 3.5 times higher. If you're normally seeing a $100 transaction from a cross-border transactions, those on average tend to be $350 and up. So really high value items. And if that's part of your strategy as an organization to be expanding to this market, you don't want to lose those customers. You don't want them to have a bad first experience with your product. And the last thing is the sales terms. So we always try to find out when people are looking at different pages, if you have the capability to kind of review what customers look at on a site while they're browsing and while they're going down the funnel of conversion, This is highly valuable information. If someone checks out your return policy or sees kind of like what the terms are, those are always indicators of legitimate transactions. Fraudsters tend not to care about if they can return a good. I would always suggest that you spend some time making sure that you have the ability to see certain pages or certain products that are viewed wherever possible. These are really important things to note as you're thinking about the holiday period. So the last thing that we wanted to highlight is all about incorporating some of this untapped data. So there's lots of information available. I'm sure many of you have integrations with several third-party data providers or are always trying to scour social media and think about what you can see. Some of the things that we find extremely helpful, and this is the right time to be analyzing what you have today, is some of the things I've already mentioned. So browsing patterns. Fraudsters will always kind of take a different approach, or most generally take a different approach than legitimate customers. It's highly unlikely that they'll come back to your site several times over a period of a few weeks or months and then purchase when an item goes on sale. You also know from an item basis, what items tend to be most susceptible to fraud. Make sure that you're thinking about that and looking at the shopping cart mix. You have to think about shipping choices as a factor. If they're using a reshipper, or if they're using a certain deliverer, or if they're shipping to a certain location. These are things that are behavioral items which can help you get to that story. Special requests are also really interesting, something that we see more often. That may be special around gift wrap, that may be special around a specific message. So people tend to kind of select items as gifts with special messages. These are information that can be used in your fraud checks to help you automate the process and ultimately help you be far more efficient. On the technical side, again, much of this information you may already be getting access to. It's more important about how you use it. Information like IP address, device fingerprinting, ABS information, and the payment method are all helpful information, but it depends on how they're used. Again, going back to our core philosophy that we never react to a single point of data to make a decision on a transaction. Make sure you understand how you're using the information that you have and that it's displayed and presented to your team that's making the reviews or building the models in a way that makes sense and allows you to be quick and actionable. So if you start to detect something early on in the holiday season, it's never too late to optimize. Make sure you have the information in place that you need today to be prepared. Lastly, we want to highlight some of the things that we also find to be good indicators of fraud, of legitimate transactions, and things that we want to make sure that you're not overlooking, where in the normal time, regular rules may not work during the holidays. So, for example, promo codes. Who is this code available to, and how is it being used? Is this something that's been mass promoted through email blast, if it's on your website, is on retail, may not? That's one thing. Or if it's a special code that was only kind of made through your VIP customers, that may be an indicator of a good transaction. Have you seen this card or email before? And if so, what were they purchasing? What was the usage? You have to be careful around things like fraud testing or card testing. But if you have a loyal customer coming back over the holidays, that should be something that you need to keep in mind. We mentioned the guarantee and returns policy page, something that fraudsters don't tend to spend a lot of time on in our experience. So if you see a customer spending time visiting these pages, tends to be a good indicator that you should keep in mind. And lastly, we like to think about the referring traffic. How did this customer get to you? Did they come through your email list? Did they come through Facebook ad? Or did they come direct and their IP kind of doesn't match their billing or shipping? Again, never something to react 100% on, but data points that shouldn't be overlooked as you're thinking about how to prepare yourself for the holiday season. So I don't want to go too much deeper into some of our capabilities and thinking, but in the remaining 5 minutes that we have, I just wanted to quickly summarize and then open it up to questions that we have from the audience about anything that we covered or other things that are on your mind. So in closing, your team will always know best. Make sure that you are taking the time to sync now, whether it's a weekly or a monthly conversation where you're going over how you're going to be prepared, reviewing all the prior data and coming up with ideas and tactics that you can implement. Always remember the holidays' unique characteristics. So remember that nothing that applies in March and April is going to be the same in the holidays, and you have to keep that in mind. Use everything you can to lighten the load. So all the data points, all the people you can, this is the time to start training them. And lastly, make sure, or at least take our suggestion to heart around the problems and issues we see around auto-declining transactions as you try to grow your business. So with that, we'll close. I'll open up for questions. As a reminder, we have 2 more webinar sessions in the bootcamp series left. Next week, we'll be talking about driving sales and stopping fraud. So how do you optimize the manual reviews that you do have? And we're finalizing the topic based on your feedback, which will take place on the 26th. So with that, I'll please open it up for questions that I see from the field. More. So I see one question coming in, wanting to get some more information on the order cheat sheet. So what do we use for our analyst team that allows them to quickly make those on-the-fly decisions? We actually have some of those that we can make available. So I can show you what we use internally. It's going to be different for you. So if there's specific things that you're looking for, or if you can give us any other information about your business, your vertical, the types of markets that you service, we can certainly cater something to your needs. Another question coming in, how do you know the difference between resale merchants and reshippers? So I know that Tomer from my analyst team is on the call as well, so I may have him jump in to support me on this response. In general, like something that we really spend a lot of time doing is investing in analyzing our merchant kind of transactions across all the different verticals and all the markets. So having a database of reshippers in our portfolio is very helpful. Often, as you know, that is the only way that a customer in certain markets can get your goods is going through a reshipper. So we need to have a database of that we can reference. So we've spent 3 years building that database. In terms of resale merchants, I'm not exactly sure, but can kind of get some more information from our team to get back to you. Another question coming in, you mentioned that using referring traffic, where would you find that information on how your customer landed on your site? Great question, and this is again where oftentimes when we talk to kind of people managing risk operations or fraud at a company and we ask them how much they're engaging with their marketing team, it's limited to none. Your marketing team will have all of this information either available to you through Google Analytics or whatever BI tool they're using. I would highly suggest that you get an account or a seat on that account so you can build that in and you can see where the traffic's coming from. It's important, especially because this is the time where your marketing teams are going to be spending the most amount of their money. And traffic will be coming in from all sorts of places. Some of it will look very foreign to you, but if there's a reason, if that's an advertising campaign or a media buy that was put out by your company, there's a very legitimate reason why traffic would be coming in that in normal seasons may not look as familiar. Let's see. Is mobile market in fraud today? So I think if I'm hearing the question correctly, the question is from a mobile perspective, how do the patterns kind of differ from desktop or other channels? So what we do see, if I'm reading that question correctly, is that fraud is kind of escalating in general. Mobile, from a commerce perspective, whether it's mobile web or mobile in-app, has been exploding. We're now seeing more than ever where a lot of the growth that traditional e-tailers were seeing from desktop is now being redirected to mobile. And a lot of what we hear, the common refrain, is that retailers should be thinking mobile first when building their site, when thinking about their e-commerce strategy. It's also very important to note that is true of fraud as well. Fraudsters are going to mobile at an increasing rate. What we've done to kind of adapt that is we've built SDKs for iOS and Android. So our core technology will work if you do have a mobile app, or it also works and scrapes on mobile web to help us combat some of those challenges. So we are out of time. If there's any last questions, I will happily take them. You can also feel free, I think my email went away, but I am at andy@riskified.com. And then, as mentioned, we'll be back again next week, same time, and the week after. So we welcome the opportunity to continue the conversation and answer any other questions you have. Thank you again for the time, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.